Today we're met with Kateryna. Kateryna, would you like to just take a moment, introduce yourself, talk about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kateryna, and I'm a clinical psychologist from Ukraine. So currently, I am located in Poland, but before the war started in Ukraine, I used to work and live in Kyiv, and I worked in the psychological center as a psychologist and as an individual psychologist, and as well as a couple therapist. So I did my training in CBT, but also EFT, emotionally focused couples therapy. And so basically I combine these two methods. And that's what like my work looked like. So I worked with clients, worked in a psychological center. I also have 3 kids. I don't know what else to tell about myself. Just had an ordinary life before that started.
Right. So you currently work with in the private sector, correct? And you have clients both in Ukraine as well as you work with some of the refugees.
Yes, that's correct. So I quit the offline work in the psychological center in Kyiv because obviously I couldn't do it anymore.
Hmm.
So I'm working currently only online, and I worked with clients from Ukraine. I worked with refugees, and some of my clients that used to live in Ukraine now moved across Europe. Also, is because of the war. And also, I work with some international platforms. So I work with multinational clients as well. So both with Ukrainians and multinationals.
Have you noticed any different trends? We'll just start with your clients that are in Ukraine. Were there any initial trends or current trends that you notice with their mental health? Or I know that we spoke previously, and there's one example I thought was really interesting with an individual that had OCD, and their OCD just kind of went away during
Mm-hmm.
the initial phases. And I was just curious if you noticed any other trends and maybe what led to the OCD going away.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So I will address this. So when the war started, like this first months, it was a really big shock for everyone. And one of my clients, that one that you're addressing, she had an OCD, quite a severe type. It was connected to this cleaning obsessions. So she cleaned everything all around for like 1,000 times a day. So that was the problem. And when the war started, she lived in Kyiv, and it was a very severe shelling and everything, like even fights near Kyiv. And that's why she had to go to the shelter with her mother and to stay there sometimes for for hours, for a night, and so on. And that what happened for her, that that these compulsions and obsessions, they were just gone, because all she had to care about at this time is about like protecting her life and really surviving, literally. So the
Hmm.
amount of stress was so high that she wasn't caring anymore about cleaning, but she was caring about the survival. And I think that may like explain how it works, because like OCD has to do with anxiety, with this obsessive thoughts about that you can like if, for example, that you can eat something and you're gonna die because it's dirty and whatever. But
Hmm.
at that moment, when it's the danger is so high, so it is the risk of really surviving. Actually, I think the brain just refocuses to the main function. So we have to survive. Anything rest is not so important now. So, and the risk of really dying because of the shelling is much more higher than if you eat something which is not clean. So I believe that's why for her it kind of switched this risks in her head, and she stopped feeling these symptoms. But unfortunately, it happened only for a while. So
Right.
after that, like she adapted. First of all, the risk situation changed. And fortunately, like Kyiv is not so in danger now, like it was in the first months of the war. And also, like, her adaptation mechanism, like, turned on, and the symptoms of OCD returned. Well, at least some of them.
Right.
Okay.
I was curious. Sorry. You're speaking about adaptation. Did you notice that a lot of individuals, or even just some of them, the new norm, like it's a war zone and it's dangerous and it's it's hostile, but how people can the norm becomes normal pretty quick. I know when I got to Ukraine, I didn't spend much time outside of Kyiv. I did a little bit in Odessa, Mykolaiv, but it was the initial shock was a day or two, being back in the war zone, hearing the air raids and stuff like that. But it only took me a couple of days, and then I was comfortable. I was wondering, did you see other people get comfortable in those type of environments?
Yeah, absolutely. That what happens, and I think again, it proves how much our brain has flexibility in adapting even to very dangerous situations. And I also read some research made by Israeli psychologist who really also saw this in Israel, absolutely, especially in the zones where there was also often shelling, and there people did not react to air raids as much as, for example, in the zones where the shellings are very rare. So it looks like when you are in danger every day for the most part of the day, the coping mechanisms work in such a way that you cannot be in this fight flight mode all the time. So you kind of adapt, you start ignoring, or so to say, avoiding the signals of danger, like air raids or like something. You just start getting used to it. Yeah, that's how I adapt. And that's, as I said, it's not only in Ukraine. I think it's generally how the brain works.
Right. For the ones that were in Ukraine, did any of them, or did you suggest any healthy habits? Was there any routines that they did that they found beneficial to improve their mental quality of life?
Well, I think the basic things what help my clients and the people that I contacted in Ukraine is really keeping those routines that they had before the war, at least the one that you can continue doing. Like if you were doing sports, you should continue doing this. Try to get some sleep, because it is a problem that because of the air raids, people cannot sleep very good and they get tired and exhausted, and this amounts in a lot of stress. So really trying to take care of the basic level of healthy lifestyle. This is very helpful, from that, because that really gives you the basis, that gives you the energy that you can still function even under such difficult circumstances. But if you ask, for example, from the, so to say, psychological perspective, what help people to to stay sane in a situation like that, I think it's very clear that it is the meaning, the sense, when people continue doing what they think is important, what they think that may help. And a lot of people started volunteering, for example, joining a lot of volunteer initiatives, or even sometimes, helping their neighbors with something, with sharing food, or helping to take them somewhere, or to buy something in the shop and to bring. So people start suggesting help others and try to put their efforts into, for example, fundraising for the army or something like that. So, and I think that is the part of these routines that now really became routines for Ukrainians. We sometimes kind of make jokes that our national sport is donating to the army. Like that's what everybody does. Like, or we often say that we convert our anger into helping the army. That's what we do. So if you're angry, don't just waste it, convert it into something useful. And I think this is the part that really gives the sense of the meaning, as I said, and the sense of being part of like community, because you help people, you see how that influences them, and you feel like not alone in the situation. You feel really connected to a lot of people. And that's how I think it helps us Ukrainians to feel that we're doing something commonly to really investing in our victory, because we all sincerely believe that we will win in this war.
So community, being part of community, I imagine the clients that you work with that are refugees, or even yourself as an example, relocating to another area, is it hard to keep that level of community intact there? As well as, I was going to see, is there any other trends that are different from the ones that stayed in Ukraine that are now located elsewhere in Europe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think it is very different experience for the Ukrainians inside Ukraine and abroad when you're not there, because like this is also my experience that I would share, that like when you're here, you read about what is happening there from the news. And obviously I have my family, my friends, and my clients there in Ukraine. And like when I read the news that, okay, was shelling in some city there, and you don't really know where it happened, like what happened. So you kind of only know it from the news, and you paint the picture maybe in your head, and you start writing to people, texting, like calling, how are you? Is everything okay? What are you doing? And when I noticed that my level of anxiety in that situation is higher, that, for example, of my family who is there, because like they respond and say, kind of okay, everything is fine, like we are safe, no need to worry, or something like that. So again, it has to do with this adaptation, because to me it sounds terrifying, like, well, it's so awful what is happening there to you. But because I'm not there, I'm not adapting to it, it triggers me all the time. And they kind of get used to the triggers. Yes, they get exhausted because of that. Yes, they have some like stress, but not the cute stress as when you are abroad. And that's why I think the level of anxiety here is even higher. And they kind of even sound sometimes calmer, like they talk about things very regularly. Oh, right. Yeah, nothing happened. It's okay. So that is, I think that is the difference. Another thing that important that you mentioned is that when you're abroad, like it's a big step to change the country. And like when you don't know the language, it's a new environment. It's a big stress. It's a big shock, especially when you are doing it. Not that you're planning immigration, but you are just a refugee, basically. So it is very stressful, I would say, and you feel kind of disconnected. So you don't know the people here, you don't know no one, and that is very hard. This is really a challenge. And how people manage to cope with that is also creating communities here. For example, in a town where I live, it's a small town. It's relatively not many Ukrainians here. But like we managed to create a chat group in a Telegram where we share the news, the information, and you can contact people there and like support each other, know information through each other. And for example, when somebody is going to Ukraine, they ask, I'm going to Ukraine. Is somebody needs something to get delivered or to something like that. So that's how we do. We kind of cooperate and create these small communities. In the big cities, there's big communities, really, like in, for example, in Poland, there are a lot of Ukrainian refugees. in Warsaw, for example, I know there are really a lot of Ukrainians, and they create big community groups, not to feel really disconnected, to feel involved. Same thing. So what we do here, we also try to donate, to help, to some kind, be supportive, and to stay connected to our family and friends who are in Ukraine. This is very important, not to feel like that you are completely alone. And what else I would say that the countries that receive the Ukrainian refugees, European countries, and for example, my experience in Poland is a lot of people in Poland, local people, they are very supportive. They help a lot. They really, like, for example, in the school where my children, to which my children go, so they did some charity raise funding for refugees, and they helped and supported a lot us. And they all the time they ask, if you need something, if the kids need something, please tell us. We are ready to help. So I must say that people are very understanding and very supportive, like locally here. And this is something that also helps.
That's amazing. Yeah, it seems to be a lot of support there in Poland whilst there also. You mentioned a few things, being away and getting your sources of information from the news. And that just kind of struck me. I know news can be really dramatic, as well as when you read something instead of visually seeing it. I know personally, before I went to Ukraine, I was expecting something much different than what I actually saw, a lot more intense. But again, I was in Kyiv when I went out to Mykolaiv and Odessa. You could see it, you could hear the shelling, so it was different. But I was just wondering, do you think maybe in your head, we think worst case scenario after we read the news, which the news is also like they get clicks, the more dramatic it may be, so I feel like all of that collectively kind of just makes it a bit more intense for people who may be abroad and just reading the news as opposed to actually seeing the news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like our brain paints the pictures that are much more terrifying than it can be in reality. Although I must say that reality is terrifying as well, because
Absolutely.
it's a real war, and people get killed every day. And
It's sad.
we also, we know that, and we don't have also to avoid it if we don't see it. So it doesn't mean that it does not exist. But for sure, when you just read the news, you kind of can go into this mode of really like it's terrible, and you start really becoming very distressed, because people who are there, again, they adapt, they kind of get used to it, although it's terrifying, and they find their coping mechanism to be in that situation and to still remain stable. And when you just like look at it in the news, like it's hard sometimes to be calm, because you don't know what is really happening there. So I think it makes sense. And also I'm participating in one project now, which is implemented in Ukraine. It's a psychological like support for the media.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with some journalists who work in the Ukrainian media, who also, like, most of the news in Ukraine are now about the war. And so what I see also in my work with this journalist, that it's very hard for them. They have high levels of burnout, because every day they read the news, they make the news, they take the interviews, they talk to the victims, they look at the pictures, at the videos. So, and they are all the time in contact with this content, everything what is connected to the war, and it's very hard really for a person all the time, to monitor, to see it, to be near it. So, and it's not easy for them, like, because this is like the negative of this profession, that you
Right.
have to stay all the time tuned in, and like it doesn't work. Like for some of my clients, I would say if you feel anxious because of the news, you can just like stop looking into the news like
Right.
once a day, and that's but I cannot give that advice to the people who professionally work with information with
Right.
the news. Yes. And it's quite tricky and quite hard for them.
What are some things that were beneficial or helpful for them in that situation? Because I imagine there's not many options. Either you take like a time off. You can't. Not everyone could just quit their job, you know. So if that's your profession and your job is doing the news, you didn't realize that your news was going to be war, and now it is war. So, what are some things that they found helpful for that type of situation?
Mm-hmm. So mainly, again, we stick to the so-called grounding routines. So if you have the time when you're out of work, when you are not at work now, and you don't have to monitor the news, then you stop doing it and you start doing other things. Like you start focusing on things not connected to work, to war, like go for a walk, go to a gym, like, I don't know, meet friends, and like this kind of things should be present in the people's life, because otherwise they really literally see war 24/7, you know.
Right.
So again, going like sticking to routines. What I think is also helpful, and what I see in those people that I work, they feel sense in their work. So they feel very much devoted. They know that what they are doing is important, and they're very feeling very motivated to do that. Yeah, they get tired, but after all, they know why they are doing this. So they know that this is important. Like the work I do is important. That's why I decided to be here. And even like this is my so-called front line. Like I'm not in a war zone, but this is my front line. I have to fight here. I have to fight to deliver the news, to deliver the information to people. And this is what I do. So I think a lot of people find strengths in understanding that they are doing something important. And what I also wanted to mention does not in respect not only the journalists, but generally the whole Ukrainians. How do we cope? It's one of the phenomenon. I think it's humor, because like this social networks and the mass media creates a big amount of memes, of jokes, of funny songs and things like that. And this is what also helps to cope very much. So we kind of have like our classical jokes about everything what is going on. So although it's inside the war, I don't mean here like black humor, so to say.
Right.
I don't know if it's in English correct.
That is correct.
But I mean that kind of playing a little bit with the senses, with some wording. So it's very hard to translate it into English, but a lot of the things are very funny, like especially about Russian propaganda or things like that. So we really make a lot of jokes about that. And this is what helps us also to cope. Like,
when I first started doing seeking therapy for my own PTSD, I went to a psychologist, and she's like, "You deal with your trauma with humor." And I was like, "I do." And she was like, she's like, "That's one of the better ways to do it." She's like, "That you not just normalizing it, but you're putting a different perspective on it, so then you can laugh about it." And that's why I've always liked comedy and stuff like that too, because they do make it funny. And then I feel like once I was able to see things not as serious and severe, then it was able to like make it more normal for myself. And then I was able to get through it a little bit easier. And one thing that you mentioned earlier that I thought was really cool, you're talking about refugees as well as the ones that were there in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians that are still in Ukraine. They talked about the war like it was normal. You know, it was a normal topic of conversation. It wasn't like quiet and refugees. And when that status and you guys get in a group chat, I feel like it's normalizing that environment, being a refugee, being outside of the country. And my hope one day is to normalize mental health in the same aspect, because I feel like once you can just freely talk about things, it just becomes it's not taboo, it's not uncomfortable. It's just like, oh, okay, we're all going through this, and it just makes everybody feel unified a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you that normalization and validation is very important. It's the first step of really accepting the things as they are and letting people talk about like what's important. And I must say also that, like, from my perspective, again, I haven't done any research or data, but what I see from from what is happening in my, I don't know, in people around me and in my clients in the like public and social media things, is that a lot of Ukrainians started really to pay attention to mental health, like,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of free psychological help now available for Ukrainians in Ukraine and also abroad. So even for refugees, and which is voluntarily, which is for free. And really people start understanding that this is important, that if I feel depressed, if I feel anxious, if I feel scared, I should talk to a psychologist. Because I would say that previously the topic of going to a psychologist with something, like, it was a little bit stigmatized, so to say, in Ukrainian society. So the part of the more young people, they accepted that, okay, like, psychologist is a normal profession. If you have the kind of problem, you just visit a psychologist and it's okay. But among the elder population, I would say it was some stigma, like, are you not okay? Why you should go to a psychologist? Like, what is wrong with you?
Right.
And I think this is also changing, and the culture of understanding that it's okay to go to the psychologist, to visit the psychologist, and even if you're, I don't know, a tough man, that
Mm-hmm.
you can need help and it's normal, it's nothing wrong with you. I think this idea, this understanding is starting really to grow in the Ukrainian society. And I think it's a good tendency, because even after the war ends, we will have to face a lot of psychological issues, I think,
Yeah.
because a lot of people had enormous amount of stress. A lot of people witnessed or like taking part in combat, and like, it's gonna be a lot to work with. And I hope that we as a society are open now in realizing this. So, but from what I see, is there really a lot of initiatives that are really giving free psychological help. This is being discussed in the governmental level as well, on the level of the civil society. There are a lot of initiatives now. And I hope that this tendency will develop, and it helps us to really overcome the negative aftermath, psychological aftermath of this war.
Right. You said it was stigmatized. It was definitely like that in my culture too. I started military almost 20 years ago, and it was seen as weak. In my environment, if you went and got mental help, it was weakness and things of that nature. It took me. I hit rock bottom, mentally, and I had a lot of suicidal ideations to spark me to go get help. And I like the movement nowadays where it's hopefully people can get help sooner, because it is more normalized and it is less stigmatized, because I feel like the sooner you get help, the less systemic it is, the easier it is to get better and quicker. So that's awesome that things are in place to move in a healthy direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see that it's changing, and you're absolutely right that it's like the sooner you go and get help, the better results would be, actually, because some people like wait for years
Yeah.
until it becomes unbearable, and it's very hard to treat at that point, because again, the brain learns a pattern. And
Mm-hmm.
if you really reproduce that pattern for years, it would be not easy to break it. So
Right.
the so-called old problems, they are very, very hard to treat. So it's better if you have an issue to go and to get help as soon as you can do it. And it's not about weakness. It's about taking care of your mental health. So nobody really sees the idea of like generally, if you feel that something hurts, you go to the doctor. So what is the problem here? If you feel that something is not okay, you feel depressed, you feel anxious, you have panic attacks, you should just go to the same. It's like, it's not a doctor, it's a specialist in mental health, and like get help. So just that easy, and nothing bad about you. So, and I really think that it's good that this stigma is like starting to become weaker. It's
Right.
not completely overcome for sure. We have a lot of work to do in Ukraine, I mean, and like, I mean, generally maybe in the world. But I think what is done now is that changes the mind of people. They see that psychological help is normal. And also we have a lot of organizations that are ready to help, a lot of psychologists that are trained. So, and I think it's a very good tendency, like it's a very good thing. So I believe it's going to change for the better.
Yeah, I think so too. I was speaking with a researcher, Anton, there in Ukraine, and initially when the war started, you see a spike in, I'll just call it bad habits, whether that be smoking, drinking, things of that nature. It was just like a really big spike, and then it dropped off after our first few months, because that's how people were dealing with the extreme acute stresses. And I can speak from my experiences is I didn't drop off, like I continued those bad habits until it did become systemic, and breaking those bad habits took a great deal of effort. So the sooner people can get help, the better. And then I was going to circle back to you, and you were in Kyiv, and then you left Kyiv for Poland. What inspired you to leave?
So when the war started, the very first day, we get in the car, took our kids, and we left Kyiv, and we went to the Western Ukraine first. So we lived in a small village near Lviv. It's in the house of my husband's parents. So we stayed there with the kids for 6 months, because at first when the war started, nobody really knew how long it would last. Mm-hmm. So actually we waited that, okay, maybe it's going to be safer and we can come back. We were hoping very much for that. But after 6 months, we realized that nothing really changed. Okay, it became safer in Kyiv, but still air raid sirens, sometimes shellings, and the schools are not working all the time. So when it's a shelling, they work online. Sometimes they don't work. And then you remember when they start shutting this energy plants, and the electricity went off. So, and there were also like this completely intervened into school life. You cannot work online. You don't have internet. So that was the problem. And then we realized that the kids cannot have a normal school. And actually all my kids are already like in school. And that was very important to get them to school. That's why we decided to try and move to Poland and to try to go to school here, because we thought that maybe the adaptation would be easier in terms of the language, because Polish is somewhat similar to Ukrainian, so that the kids could learn the language quickly, and that it's not going to be far from Ukraine. That is why my family can come to visit me. So that's why we decided to go to Poland and to get school for the kids. So that was the basic reason, I would say. safety and a normal routine for the kids' school. That was important.
No, that's definitely, that's one thing that I noticed too. We did a lot of training for schools and children and adults near towns, and we utilized a lot of the facilities to do that. And most of the classes were still online. There wasn't any students at the school except for the ones that were within a walking distance. Everybody else was remote. And from experience that I've heard here, it's just remote learning is not the same as in-person learning, especially when we're talking about younger children. So I understand that, as well as the importance of family. You spoke on that earlier, staying connected with family. So taking your family and moving there. But I wanted to ask you, relocating to Poland, that's an experience that I feel like a psychologist could articulate a little bit better. Like, how did that work? Like, I imagine initially you felt a little bit uncomfortable because the newness of it. Like, what did you do to get established? How quickly was it? Like, what was just the overall experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, yeah, I would say that in my case, I had a soft landing, so to say, because like I had some time to prepare. So I stayed for a while in Ukraine and I was thinking about these options. And it was much, much harder for the people who were crossing the border on the 24th of February, just going nowhere with kids, with their pets. And like, it was terrible, in this long queues on the border. When it was cold, it was really terrifying. So I know that some people did this. So fortunately, I did it in a much more prepared way. And so it was easier from that practical perspective, I would say, for me. But obviously, when you change the country, you change the culture, the location, everything. And like, by the way, I don't know Polish. Like, I'm learning now, but I don't speak Polish so fluently. And although it's similar to Ukrainian, but similar, it doesn't mean that you can like understand everything, especially that you can speak. That's not the case. Even if you understand, like it's not the same. So I would say that first it was really a big shock for me, like to really to learn how things work here, to get used to things. And what helped me is again that everybody here was very supportive, and also here was the friend of my family who lives in this town, and he helped us a lot also with relocation, with like school, everything at the first time when we came. And so I guess the main thing what helped me is my routine, so to say, and this is work. In my case, I'm very happy that I have an opportunity to work online, that my profession provides me this opportunity, because this is something what keeps you going, wherever you are. So I moved to Poland, but I have my laptop, I have like everything with me, I have my books, and I just sit and work. And that gives me this feeling of grounding and stability. So I feel that I'm still doing the same things that I did before. I'm still the same person that I was before. And that helps to really stay grounded, I would say. After a while, after a shock went away, I started exploring the place, the territory, meeting people. So now I feel much more adapted here. So I lived here already for 8 months, and I kind of feel much more relaxed, I would say. It's not the same as you stay home. I don't feel home here, and obviously I couldn't, because it's not so much time, and I still feel like it's a temporary place for me. But again, work, settling the routines, getting children to school, and then exploring the territory, getting to know some people who are here. I think that helped me to feel much more relaxed and easier here.
That's awesome. I imagine in no time your children will be teaching you Polish.
Yeah, that's what they usually do.
Yeah,
They
they're
correct my
so quick.
mistakes. They say, "Mom, what are you saying? That's not correct."
That's awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
so that again, I think is a unique experience is your children. That's not something I've talked to anyone about. Is how did you explain that to them while this was all starting in Ukraine, as well as the transition to Poland? I imagine that kids are very pliable and they adapt quickly, just like the rest of us. But it's how do you
Mhm.
help the confusion? I'm just curious. I know that there's organizations now, which I think is phenomenal, that they're actually teaching schools about mental health and teaching children about mental health and giving them like insight on like, hey, this is what's happening if you're experiencing this. But I'm just curious, how did you explain this to your children?
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So good question. And like, I want to start it in the place where I was thinking about like something that I read in one book about resilience and how we like grow resilient and so on. And it was an interesting thing there that like I remembered is like how, for example, children learn resilience, how they know how to be resilient and how to face certain situations and challenges, and they learn it mostly from their parents.
Mhm.
So the main thing, if you want the children to stay really like stable, because they don't know how to react to certain circumstances yet, because they don't have the experience. So they all the time they look up to the adults, and if the adults can be safe, predictable, and like explain things and create this safety and show the model of resilient behavior, then the kids like normally just learn it because that's what they see in their parents, for example, in their family members. So the main idea is that when that happened, the main idea was not to start panicking, and not because otherwise the kids would see that something terrifying is happening. And like that's what I tried to do, to really stay in a situation where, yeah, it's very serious, it's hard, we have to move, for example, or we have to change the location. But I try to really react in a normal way, not to show this state of panic to the children, and to stay grounded. And then I see that, okay, they still safe anyway, because they don't realize what is really happening, how serious it is. But another thing, what I was thinking about is that anyway, if we children need answers to their questions, and obviously they are of a different age. My children, I mean, that's why I try to explain to each of them at their level of development how they would understand, like what happened, why we had to move, like what are the reasons of the war, why is it happening, like the basic things, because I think it's important. Again, we're modeling for our children how to address the situation, and we want them to also have some basic information about that, because like it's important part of being resilient is like seeing the situation in reality, knowing how to react, knowing how to analyze, to have this information. So I'm not really creating like an imaginary safe world around my children. Like I was telling them the truth. Yes, it's war. Yes, it's not safe, but we are safe here. That's why we moved here. That's why for now we stay together. And if something happened, we go there. And like, for example, so I try to really stay calm, but stay realistic, not to give them the sense that nothing is happening, you don't have to bother about anything. So I think that was important. And they felt from one side, they were informed, they get all the answers to their questions. They don't feel that they don't understand what is happening. They understood everything what is happening. And we also discussed with them that we were going to be maybe moving to another country. Probably it will be Poland. You will have to go to a new school. So we were really talking about these things and preparing them for that. And I think this is what worked, because after all, I think that here in Poland they adapted quite well. Mm-hmm. So for the time being, they go to school, they learn in this local school, and they made some friends. So they are quite living a normal life for school children.
Right. No, that's awesome. You spoke about you learned from your parents, being safe and resilient. I'm curious, are there any, like, I guess, common examples of someone who may, or like an example of not being safe, not being resilient? Like, I'm trying to think of a way to just express to others, like if they're like doing a self-evaluation, like what are some signs that maybe that you could see in yourself that you're not dealing with the situation well, so maybe you're not being the best example possible for your children?
Okay. To a certain extent, it can be subjective, like how people estimate what is a resilient response to a situation, what is not. But from my perspective, when I say resilient is the most like useful, helpful, and less stressing way of addressing the adversity. So that's how I would try to, like, when you know what to do. So when you really take the right decisions, or at least you analyze, you are grounded in the reality. Because the thing is that, okay, there's one type of people who, for example, may panic or may get too emotional in certain situations. But for example, and this is one type of responding to some crisis situations. But also I know, and I read that in the media, a lot of information about people who are avoidant in these situations. And for example, the people who live in war zones, or in zones that could be occupied by the troops, and they didn't want to move out, to evacuate from these regions. And despite that, they were warned that it's like the troops are coming, or you're gonna be shot, so you better leave your home and go to the safer region. And they avoided like thinking about this. They say to themselves, "No, we're gonna sit here. It's gonna be okay. Like we have a cellar, for example, and we will sit and everything." And that was not a good decision for many of them, like when really the war reached these regions. And I think it's example of not a resilient, I would say coping strategy, because you underestimate the risk and you really avoided it. You say, "Oh, it's going to be okay. Like I'm going to survive." Like, so we have to, I think when we talk about resilience, is not only staying like emotionally stable, but it also some kind of maturity or ability to realistically analyze the situations and take the correct decisions, that lead to the right steps. Because in the crisis situations, you often have to take the steps. Otherwise, it can be consequences.
Right. In my career field, what we called them was triggers. Like we had triggers that meant if this happened, this is when we would egress. This is when we would leave, so having a plan in place, like not just avoiding until you can avoid, have like what we did was just have a plan in place that if it got to an elevated risk factor, then we knew that it was time to go before it got too dangerous. I don't know. It's kind of what that reminded me of.
Yeah, but you kind of had this algorithm. Okay, how to act in this situation, how to act. So you were prepared to do this. Yeah, and it's good and it's okay because you're professional. And like, unfortunately, many people like never faced something like that. I mean, civil people living in different regions of Kyiv, and they couldn't imagine that something like that would happen. Nobody really believed. Only after the occupation of certain cities, it was clear that the war really brought so much terrible things, and like no one really expected. So it's terrifying, really. So it's, I think, one of the thing of the being resilient is knowing how to act, like taking the right decisions, having this B plan, so to say, what we do if what you were saying.
Right. So for you're a psychologist, you have a lot of training for mental health. Do you go and see a psychologist? Do you seek help from a professional to make sure that you're still, everything's good to go, get another perspective or anything like that?
Well, currently I'm not seeing a psychologist. I had a therapy several years ago when I did the training. So I had a therapy for a year, I guess, to deal with my personal issues and to really again, to become more resilient, to find out something about myself that can be an obstacle in my work, for example. So I think it's quite normal when a psychologist works and it goes to other psychologists and needs help, because I'm a normal I'm a normal person who can have my own issues. Now currently I'm not seeing any professional, but I'm taking a lot of, so to say, supervisions and intervisions. It's not the same in terms, because these are events. So supervisions is basically there is a supervisor, like the more experienced psychologist, who is supervising your cases. This is one type. Intervisions is when you meet with the colleagues of the same level as you are, and you share your opinions again about the clients and things like that. And I think this is very supportive for me to be the part of my professional community, to share these cases, to have this support. And I think that what helps me. So I'm not really having my personal issues now. That's why I'm not seeing the psychologist as an individual, but I'm taking this support from supervisions and intervisions from my community. And this is very important because it helps me in my work.
That's awesome. Is there anything else in your life that you find useful or helpful during this time? I feel like we covered quite a bit. I just wanted to give it one more roundabout, and then after that, I was going to ask if someone was listening to this and they're like, "Man, I'd really like to get more information on this," or "I'd like to get a better understanding of, what to do or how to get help." What would you suggest to someone like that?
Okay, I think if we to finish this topic with what helps us to cope in crisis situation, in challenging situations, the only thing that I didn't mention, and I think it's worth mentioning, is that also has to do with one thing that was very, very common for Ukrainians, especially at the beginning of the war. A lot of them, I would say even not them, I would say us, because I was one of them, were experiencing the so-called guilt of the survivor. When we almost felt guilty that we are in a safe place and that our that our soldiers are not safe, or other people who are in the shellings in Mariupol, for example, they are in a terrible situation. They are under attacks all the time. And you kind of sometimes even feel guilty for giving yourself simple pleasures, I don't know, warm tea, or having a nice chat, or watching a movie. You feel guilty because others are in such a distressful situation. It's so terrible. So you almost feel guilty for it. So it's very common, this general guilt of the survivor in the situation like this. But one of the things is that we realize that what makes us stronger, what helps us to go through this crisis and to address the situation is also like is also giving ourselves the space for nice things, for hobbies, for I don't know, for things we like, for simple pleasures, for I don't know, for traveling, for just feeling happy. It is very hard when you are in the situation of the war, but as it continues and it goes so for so long, it's like a marathon. If you don't recharge your battery, if you don't give yourself the right to feel happiness, to do something that you like, you would probably end up depressed. So this is also an important part, which we have to know, and which also helped me to cope. Because when I was stuck. I didn't let myself like go out, do the things that I like. Mm-hmm. Now I started, for example, going for walks or cycling, and I went to the swimming pool. So I started doing things that give me pleasure, that give me the satisfaction, that make me happier. And this is also an important part of building up the resilience.
Right. No, I like it. We did that. I believe I played football once while in Afghanistan. You know, it was weird to me to be playing a sport while also being in the middle of a war zone, but it was something that we just did, and it was enjoyable. It was fun, and it recharged us, and it made us feel better, you know. So on that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really find almost everyone I've talked to in Ukraine is just so positive and uplifting. And that's why I find it so interesting. There's clearly something that you guys are doing that's working. And I think what you mentioned earlier, having a bit of humor in the dark times, you know, I feel like that's definitely a common thing that I've seen. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on that maybe I didn't ask?
Well, I also thank you for that conversation. As I told you before, it was very helpful for me, like to reflect on my own experience, because what I do mostly is reflect on others people's experience and like not really see myself as a part of it, you know, like having the experience of being a refugee. How was that for me? So it was also very helpful for me, and to really, again, like go through these points and like a little bit reflect on my own experience. I believe like we touched a lot of the things. Yeah. So as for me, I can talk about the psychology and all the stuff for 4 hours. I can go on and on.
I love it.
But I think like we opened up, I think, mostly the topic of what we wanted to discuss. So basically, I think I mentioned the most important things that I wanted to share. So thank you for this conversation. It was quite an experience for me. Thank you.
No, thank you. I enjoyed it. And if we ever have an opportunity to chat again, or if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know and I'll be there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. And with that, we'll wrap it up.